until 12 o'clock to say good afternoon. So good afternoon, and welcome to our Scholarly Communications Series, the Health Sciences and Human Services Library Scholarly Communications Series for this spring. I am MJ Toohey. I'm the Executive Director of the Health Sciences and Human Services Library and Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs. We launched the idea of a scholarly series, kind of talking about scholarly communication about a year ago, and some of you were here when we had the New England Journal here talking about publishing in the New England Journal. And this year, we were fortunate enough, through serendipity, I love serendipity, through serendipity, to be able to bring a different type of speaker. It all started with Dr. Kurt Sivan, who just came in and is standing in the buffet line, asking me a question about an article he saw in Science that came from this past fall.
We were on the street out there.
We were on the street, right out in front of this building. And asking, what I knew about it, wasn't this important research, what kind of things, what implications were there for the University of Maryland? And I said, well, I don't know, but I can find out. Well, it just so happens that about 2 years ago, I was on a panel with a gentleman from Thomson Reuters named Jim Pringle. And I thought, well, he's my contact at Thomson Reuters. He's the person I know. I'll start with him. And so I started with Jim, who, by the way, got posted to Switzerland, so didn't answer my email for a long time. I thought, did I offend him? What happened? But as it turned out, he was in Switzerland, wasn't reading his email, wrote back to me immediately, which I was grateful for when he finally picked it up, and said, sure, we can help. So he brought together a team of people at Thomson Reuters to try to identify not only the folks who had worked on the study that was in Science about research metrics and the impact of metrics in institutions and all, but also to see what else we could talk about, because we know that this is an important conversation that a lot of our researchers and faculty have on this campus. So today I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Yvette Seeger, who is a Strategy Analyst Associate at Discovery Logic, which is a business that's actually within Thomson Reuters, which does a lot of the analysis and evaluation, provides a lot of the analysis and evaluation services to Thomson Reuters. And she's provided some subject matter expertise in a wide range of products or projects, including these newly released academic information management systems that Thomson Reuters now oversees. Thomson Reuters, for those of you that go back as far as I do, think ISI, Institute for Scientific Information, impact factors, things like that. This is kind of what ISI has grown into. It's now Thomson Reuters, which is the much bigger umbrella. Her background is, her PhD is in genetics from SUNY Stony Brook, and she has worked a number of places, including Cold Spring Harbor. Before she came to Discovery Logic, she was a senior policy analyst for the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Genetics, Health, and Society, a research associate with the DC-based research advocacy organization Faster Cures, and a science policy fellow at the National Academies. So she's got a great background, and she's really knowledgeable about this. And so you can see the title of her talk today is Issues and Challenges in Faculty Research Evaluation, Creating an Environment for Research Excellence, which is really, really pertinent when we think about the kind of things that are going on our campus today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Yvette Seeger.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, MJ, for introducing me. Can everyone hear me okay? We're debating about miking me, and I really don't want to blow anyone's eardrums. So if you can hear me okay, I think we're good to go without the mic. So as MJ said, this has been a very interesting process pulling together this talk. The emails on the Thomson Reuters side are, who's available, who's willing to do this? So I like to joke that this talk is a bit of a Franken talk. I will be talking about the Global Research Report on the United States that was featured in Science magazine, and then drill down into what we do at Discovery Logic, because we do a lot of contracts with the NIH and work with academic institutions, and how do they evaluate their research programs. I'll just ask if you have any questions. If it's really burning, I can try to handle it while we're doing the talk, but if you have questions, I'd prefer to hold them towards the end. I guess I'll just go ahead and get started. So why research assessment? Basically, I sat here and I said, it's the economy, stupid. The economy is we see it very much every day. We were talking earlier, we had the threat of the shutdown last week, which made my week very interesting. considering half of our company is funded by government contracts. You know, obviously the economy is not doing well, and every facet of public resources are being hit by this. So we have scarce resources. We have to distribute them selectively. We should try to have an equitable distribution, but depending on who you talk to, you know, they may think it's equitable, they may not. But you know, in terms of research, we need to also maintain academic confidence. If we don't have the support of the academic community, you aren't going to have them coming to you and sharing their research or pursuing you as a funding resource. Also, and I'm sure all of you are very aware, that the whole atmosphere of research has changed. Gone is the day of having a single or two author paper. You know, these are very collaborative efforts. And they're not just collaborative within the same country, they're collaborative across country borders. And you know, you have to be a little creative in how you do these things, because big science, very expensive, requires a lot of people. So going back to the Global Research Report, I'm just going to show a few figures from this, just to, this is a mess actually, oh awesome, I have my pointer. So basically, what that report showed is that the United States, you know, we're the big gorilla, 800-pound gorilla in the research world, but it's not looking that way as we move forward. And as you can see on the left side of the screen, you see the USA, you know, we kind of peaked out towards the end of the NIH doubling period. And who's catching up? Asia Pacific. You know, Europe is still trugging along. We see differences in different fields. Obviously, Asia Pacific has focused on materials science and engineering. The USA is still a leader in molecular and biology and genetics based on all the investment that we put in there with the NIH doubling. But you can see Asia Pacific is catching up and Europe is steadily trucking along. So, you know, these are the things that we're looking at. These are your publications. Who's leading? It's not just the United States and a couple little countries. They're catching up. And we're actually, as you can see, in engineering and material science, the United States is actually lagging and seeing a decrease in their production in terms of publication. This slide shows a research footprint of the outputs, and basically what you're looking at is the distribution of publications across the different fields. And again, you see just it's a different way of looking at things. You can see Europe has a pretty balanced perspective of the different fields and their publications. The United States is definitely skewed towards the health and social sciences. And Asia, although a smaller part of the footprint, is definitely geared toward the physical and material sciences and engineering things, which is important for the economy because those fields, they build things, they sell things, they stimulate the economy. Health and social sciences stimulates the economy well also, but in a different way. And so, you know, we have to look at these sort of research footprints to understand where are we going to put our funding, where are we going to put our focus. So in terms to do a research assessment, the criteria, standard criteria for those of us in the room is peer or expert review, and I think all of you are very familiar with peer review. It's the traditional means for assessing research quality, excellence, and impact, but we also know it's not perfect. It tends to focus on academic impact, you know, the ivory tower issue of, you know, we know what's best for us in academia. But if you want to evaluate other forms of impact, you have to get creative and look at other ways of evaluating this. The process is a bit opaque. I don't know how many of you have gotten back a peer review evaluation and said, I don't know where they came up with that, or, you know, how did that get funded? There's a perceived lack of objectivity due to the influence of reputation. Again, you know, it's peer review is based on who you know, what you've done, your impact on the field, but if you're just starting out, how are you going to establish that reputation? And it is resistant to innovative approaches. And we've seen that with some of the more traditional funding institutions in the biological sciences, and they are trying to change the peer review process, but you know, it is what it is, unfortunately. So what defines research quality? And this table, it's divided into two sections. There are the internal evaluations and the external evaluations. Peer review is very focused on the internal qualifiers. So, you know, is it timely? You know, is it going to rapidly advance the research field? Is it pervasive? Is it going to have outreach to other facets of the field? Or is it just something that you're going to do once and then, put it down and, wow, that was a nice finding. And excellent, this quote-unquote excellent. And the external perspective, which is what we view, which is very important to those of us in the science policy arena, is, what can we do with the research? What's the potential commercial use? How is it applicable to the public? And can it advance education or training programs? Because although we like to think that the experiment, the result of the experiment is the product, actually it's the people, and that's the main output that we're looking at and in terms of investment in research. That's what is important to everyone on the Hill, as they're debating NIH funding. What can we do, what can we make, and how do we build our resource base of human capital? So, using quantitative indicators to assess research. A single indicator is insufficient. I mean, if I could do all the experiments I did in grad school using a single indicator, I would have been made, you have to use multiple things to be able to assess if something is good, bad, or, ooh, wow, wish I hadn't done that experiment. Good combinations of indicators provide differing perspectives across the research landscape. So, you're not skewing towards an answer that you already know. I mean, so many times the simple experiment has indicators that they're based on each other rather than, actually trying to get a picture, the big picture of how it actually fits. And indicators are unlikely to be in complete agreement, and this is your estimate of uncertainty within the assessment. So, some of the principles of quantitative research evaluation. A big thing that we encounter when we try to work with groups for doing an evaluation process is making sure they understand what they want to know. And I can't stress this enough, because we sit down with the client, they think they know what they want to know, but when you get right down to it, they can't put your finger on it. And so you really have to understand the purpose of your program and what it's expected to achieve. And then you can start to say, these are the questions I want to answer. Everything in research evaluation is relative. There's no absolute. So, we can't do a report for you and say, this is what you should do. We can give you ideas. We can say, well, this is how it's trending. But, we can't give you an absolute answer. Impact may be local, national, or international. And you need benchmarks for each of those layers to make any sense of a number. So it's comparing apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. You don't want to compare institution A in the United States to institution B in China. You have to find a way to normalize those data. And in the end, we do these research evaluations to add value. It's not just an exercise of saying, just to do the evaluation. It should mean something, and it should add value to the program and how you pursue future endeavors. And a big thing that we always encounter as we're doing a research evaluation, we get to that last bullet that I just talked about, how do we add value? But then, what data are available? What resources do you have available to you? And that's a big thing. Even in the lab, it's what tools do I have available? Well, with the research evaluation, again, it's what tools do I have available? So do I have data? That's the big question. Are the data that I have even relevant to the questions I'm trying to ask? And can the available data address the question? So, now we finally get to the pictures, which is where I'm comfortable, because now I can really ad-lib. So we all know research is kind of a black box, and I think every one of us in the room, we could go into a lab and say, that's a good lab, or look at some of the outputs, look at how they're operating, look at some of the publications, be like, they're doing good work. That's important work. But we don't really have a good way of saying why we know that. It's just that gut feeling. Well, unfortunately, gut feelings don't really bode well for research evaluations. But in the end, if you're going to evaluate a research black box, you have to look at the inputs and the outputs. We can expand this out. Okay, we want to know what research quality is. We can look at inputs and outputs, We can even step it back even more, the ideas, the proposals, the applications and partnerships, the front end of the grant application process. My screen just went out here. And then the outputs, the outcomes, what happened with that research. Sorry, I'm going off of this now because the screen went black here. So, and then you expand this out and you can look at the different things, and we have the boxes. Okay, saying you guys want to do a research evaluation. What do we want to know? Okay, and research quality. Well, the evaluation needs to use all these expanded things. So in terms of funding, where is the funding coming from? How much do you have? What kind of contacts do you have? Are you working with industry, or are you just working with the NIH? Are you working with private charities? How many people do you have working in a lab? Number of researchers, the type of facilities you have available to you. What types of collaboration do you have? This really expands what you're able to do. And then in terms of outputs, the number of people you've trained, the literature you've produced, patents, anything, licenses, companies that you've had as spin-outs. These are all the things that the policy people are looking at as a mode of evaluation. And all of these factors, not only do we have all those bits and pieces and baubles that we have to look at, you also have to take into consideration the location. Where is the activity taking place? When is it taking place? And the subject area, because I think we could all pretty much agree on, and I have a slide later, fields progress at different rates. Biological sciences is all about the quick and dirty paper, 4 figures and it's out and you try to publish, in a short period of time, whereas other fields, it's a lot longer to get that publication put together, mainly because they have huge proton accelerators and things like that. So, getting all those things coordinated, you have to take all these factors into consideration. So, principles of quantitative research evaluation. Are the proposed data relevant to the question? Mentioned that before. Can the available data address the question? Are we comparing like with like? I can't stress this enough, because you have to normalize your data in order to be able to do anything useful. Because if you're comparing Harvard with the community college, that's not a fair evaluation. You have to normalize those data, and we have lots of tools that we use in terms of bibliometrics, the field, the field of study, the categories, the research subject categories. You have to compare like with like. Can we test the outcomes using multiple indicators? Have we normalized our data? Again, it's all relative, it's not absolute. Do we understand the characteristics of the data? Are there artifacts in the data that require editing? And we encounter this a lot in our program evaluations. There's always these caveats, the funding atmosphere at the time might have changed, or is it a new program, or is it a program that went away? And do the results appear reasonable? I mean, in the end, it's really bad that I have all these bullets, and then it comes down to, do you feel right about it? Is it something you would have anticipated? I mean, you can get some unanticipated results, but for the most part, you should be able to kind of know where it's going to go with minimal surprises. So, how do we judge these possible indicators? First of all, I said they need to be relevant and appropriate. Are the indicators correlated with other performance estimates? Do the indicators really distinguish excellence as we see it? So, if it's measuring something that you wouldn't factor into your personal definition of excellence, it may not be something that you want to use. Are these the indicators that researchers would use? And that's a big thing. I mean, if you're going to do the evaluation, you need to believe the indicators that you're using. Cost effective, and this is a big thing for us, is, are the data accessible? Do they cover what you need to cover? And are they validated? Are they easily accessible? Are you paying so much for the data that you've spent all your budget for your evaluation on buying the data? And also the indicators must be transparent, equitable, and stable. So are the characteristics and dynamics of the indicators clear? You know, can you look at them? Does it make sense? Are all institution staff and subjects treated equitably? That's a big thing. Again, like with like. This is the recurring thing. If you leave with one phrase from this talk, just say like. And how do people respond? Can they manipulate the indicator outcomes? And this is something, and this slide is from one of my colleagues in the UK, and he mentioned Goodhart's law. So, you know, once you say we're going to evaluate something on an indicator, you'll see a behavioral change, and that's actually what this next slide shows. And so this is showing, this is a research evaluation exercise in the UK, and they do it every 5 years. I believe it's 5, well, doesn't count, I can't do math. But, you know, they do it every once in a while, and so, you know, they do it on a regular basis. And basically what they do is they ask the faculty members to submit their 4 items that they want to be evaluated on. And you would assume that if you were only given 4 items, you would probably pick your best ones. And so you can see by field, where's my mouse? So science. You know, science is very journal driven, and as you can see, most of the things that were submitted in each of the evaluations, the highest percentage were journal articles. You know, a little bit more from conference proceedings, but you know, journal articles, that's the language of science. Engineering, they're a little more heavily based on conference papers and proceedings. That's their language, and as you can see over the course of time, you know, pretty much, you know, little shift to journal articles. But in the social sciences, when they said that they were going to be evaluated on the number of journal articles they produced, you know, the first year, you know, you see that they do more books and chapters, but gradually, as they got savvy to what the evaluation was looking for, you see this dramatic increase in what they actually submit. And that may not actually be the language of their field. And so you have to be careful with these indicators that you're not skewing the results, because they may have their books may have been better, but they think that they're being judged on journal articles, and that's what they're counting. You will see the response from the community. So, bibliometrics. And I will just say that I am not a bibliometrician. It's just one of the things that we do at Thomson Reuters, but we do like to talk about it. And so why are bibliometrics a popular source of research indicators? So academia, publication, again, it's your language. So publication is a universal characteristic of academic research and provides a standard currency. And this is very, very true in the biological sciences, as we just saw, even from this UK evaluation. This is what you do. You're judged on the number of papers you produce, and your impact factor and your citation counts. Citations are a natural part of this academic behavior. You want to be cited. The more you're cited, the more your paper is getting written or getting read, and you know, you have more people cross-referencing you, and your work is getting out there. That's how we communicate in the biological sciences. Citation counts are associated with academic impact, and impact is deemed a proxy for quality. So, you know, I remember us sitting in grad school, and what are your goals, Yvette? I want to publish and sell. So, you know, and why did I say I wanted to publish and sell? The impact factor, you know, it's the journal, you know, it's science, nature. You want to publish where the high impact is, because those papers are more highly cited. I mean, that's what impact factor is. And bibliometric data are typically accessible, affordable, and increasingly international. There are some imbalances, but you know, we have at Thomson Reuters, we have a Web of Science, Web of Knowledge, where we take all these citation counts, we have the impact factor, and we have it all available to you, and it does provide a measure of how you're doing and how that paper, or at least the journal within which that paper is published, is doing. So you kind of have an idea of how you stack up against others in your field. Data characteristics are well understood and widely explored. We know that citation counts grow over time. I don't think anyone, although after this talk, you know, people may start to take my citations away. But you know, typically, you know, if you're gonna get cited, your citations are gonna grow. You know, it's not something that goes away, but there are a lot of papers out there that never get cited. Not to be depressing. Citation behavior is a cultural characteristic, and it varies between fields. Again, this is where the biologist, it's like, oh yeah, we're very good about citing. Other fields, not so much. I mean, in the material sciences and engineering, you look at their citation sections like this. And that's one of the things with publishing in a journal like Nature, you're limited in your citations. And so that's a way to curb some of that overactive citation activity. But it does vary field to field, no matter what journal you publish in, you have that culture. And then citation behavior may vary between countries. You know, and again, it's how much you want to cross-reference your work. I mean, sometimes people may not want to cite a paper, and I don't know if it's malicious or not, you know, but it's, in the US, we seem to be more collaborative, and in other countries, they may not be citing. So, you know, you have these bibliometric factors, they're good evaluation indicators, but there may be some things that you need to take into consideration that they're not perfect. You know, they're not used the same way by everyone. And just because we like graphs that go up to the right, we always walk by people's cubes and we see a graph that goes this way. It's like, yeah, that's good. So as I said, citation counts grow over time, but they vary between fields. And just putting into pictures what I just said, you can see as biologists, we like to cite. We're good at citing. And in physics and engineering, again, it's the same pattern, but the rate of citation is much lower than the biological sciences. And again, that's part of the behavior of publishing. Those two lower fields, physics and engineering, don't necessarily publish at the same rate that we do in biological sciences. I just said we, you know, I'm putting myself back in the lab. Anyone got a pipette? I'll go to work after this talk. So raw citation counts must be adjusted using a benchmark. So, you know, I can look at my citation counts for my publications, but really it doesn't mean anything until I normalize it. So you need to separate articles and reviews. I mean, it's the pretty obvious bullet, but you know, a research article is a different quality and status than a review. I mean, a review is just looking at work that's already out there, but a research article is your unique work. Then you need to normalize the raw count by using a global reference benchmark. And so we have, we do this by subject category at Thomson Reuters, you know, making sure, again, that you're putting like with like, that you're not comparing molecular biology with mechanical engineering. You need to take the year of publication into account. So this is a big thing with impact factor. The impact factor for a journal varies because impact factor is reevaluated every 2 years. You know, you know what it is for 1 year, but you need to look at the year in which the paper was published. You need to take the field into account. Again, you know, going back to my graph, it goes this way. You know, biologists, we love to publish journal articles. But then how do you define the field? You know, we throw in all these wrenches, you know, okay, we have to take the field into account, but how do we define the field? And this is one of the things that we deal with a lot when we work with academic institutions is biology department A here and biology department B may be completely different, and physics is actually the best example. You know, you have applied physics and theoretical physics, but they both call themselves a physics department. So how do you make sure that you're comparing like with like? I mean, if I were a physicist, I would say those two fields or two ways of thinking are completely different. So, you know, we can look to defining fields by research councils, so the national academies, departments, what are the research makeup of the researcher makeup of those departments, the journals that are produced by that group of researchers in each of those departments, and we can get really granular. So it's one of those things where you can say biology is the highest level that you can go, but you may be better trickling down and being like, okay, which section is the molecular biologist, which are, you know, the cellular biologists, and break it down so that you're not looking at the big pot of biology. So what is impact? Research excellence might be termed academic impact. And again, you know, we use these terms, oh, excellence and impact. It's why we're looking at these indicators anyway. It's we're trying to evaluate whether this research is good. And, you know, unfortunately, whether or not your research is good is tied to funding or, you know, getting collaborators, getting people to work with you. But you can look at it from the perspective of this furthered the field, you know, this helped us learn something. And then, but from the policy side, economic and societal impact are legitimate evaluation tools. I mean, did we help decrease disease over a certain span when we funded this research? We do a lot of evaluation of NIH training programs. Did we train more researchers? Are they doing this type of work? Are they doing more cross-disciplinary work? So you have to get a little creative in defining excellence, and you have to set that out right at the outset of your evaluation. It's like, this is what I want it to be. This is the outcome that I'm interested in. Did we train more people? Did we train more people with physics backgrounds to go into cancer research? And that's how you can evaluate impact or define impact. So chasing impact. So this was initially talked about with relation to citation counts back 50 years ago. You know, it's something that we think we know it, but you don't have quite a precise definition. So in the current focus, in this current environment, going back to the economy and all the money, I mean, if you're not a scientist, you look at what the NIH gets, it's like, wow, we're spending a lot of money on this, what are we getting? So you have to look at the economic and societal impact. And this is the way that you're being evaluated on the outside. And that's how your value is being attributed to your research. And again, just looking at the impact of your research, they should follow the basic principle of research evaluation. And there has to be ownership. You know, if you're going to define excellence and impact, you have to take ownership of that evaluation measure within your group. So you can't say, well, this is how we're going to evaluate something, but then not have your buy-in. So it's not just the people on the hill saying, this is how we're going to evaluate you. You know, you can like it or shove it. You know, you have to have the buy-in, and I think even policymakers realize that they need to have that buy-in from the community, because you can get money elsewhere. There are plenty of other funders, not as broad as NIH, but you know, you can say, well, I'm not going to do this, and then you lose the workforce. So, measuring impact beyond publications. And now I'm moving away from the more broad slides of Jonathan Adams, my colleague in the UK, to discovery logic slides, and you'll see me get a little more comfortable. It's like putting my slippers on. So as I said, we do a lot of work with the NIH and academic institutions who are interested in evaluating their programs, looking at if they've received a good chunk of funding, how do we apply this to make sure that we're on target with our aspirant universities. We want to we're here now, but we want to get to this group of universities, and so we do a lot of those evaluations. So some of the questions we ask, are grant programs effective? Can we provide a public analytics interface for our funding record? Again, NIH, they're always looking to be accountable. So this is a lot of our work. It's like, did we do something? You know, we got a lot of money, did we do something? Can we link funding to outcomes and impact? So, you know, we gave you a pot of money and you got journal articles out, but what are some of the other forms of currency that we were able to get from this funding? How can we demonstrate impact? I mean, we're constantly looking for other ways to measure impact in research. We have BIBLIOMETRIcs, but looking at other fields, moving beyond biology, how do we measure impact in fields that aren't so publication driven? Who are the key researchers? You know, how do I identify the best of the best in my field? You know, who do I need to flag as this is a person you want to either recruit or, you know, put out there for speaking to the public? what is the network of researchers in this area and how has it changed over time? And as science has become more and more collaborative, this has become a more important part of our work, and what we're constantly looking at is how do we build research networks? How do we look at how departments are interacting? And at a medical-based school, you may find that you interact a lot more than you would at a very segmented, basic campus where, the physicists are here and the biologists are here. But you try to find ways to build networks between these researchers and see if, NIH funding that tries to do cross-disciplinary research is actually getting them to talk or walk across the campus. And then how can we demonstrate this collaboration? So this is just a list of some of the evaluation questions we've asked. I won't bore you with reading all of them. I'm sure you can all read them. But some of the questions we look at, they're focused on portfolio analysis. We've built a tool for NIH that allows for some of the program analysts to build portfolios of research projects, and they can see how their portfolio is doing in terms of publication, patents, subsequent grants. We do topical analyses, what type of research are we supporting? What type of research do we want to support? Have there been changes? Network analysis, are specific groups working with each other, and this is very important for the NIH as it has larger program or center grants being funded. Trends and predictions. This is where we have a lot of fun. It's trying to figure out where are we going next. What's going to be the next big thing? Where has work gone? What's waning? And we do this with some nonprofit funding groups. Is they want to know what's going to be the hot topic. What should they be funding? What's the non-traditional research that we should be funding? Analyzing institutions. This is, if an institution wants to move forward and they have funding to sponsor a new kind of research, how should they do that funding? Training, I've talked a lot about that. How is our training program doing? Is it achieving its outputs? And resources and mission impact. So, is our funding producing resources that are used? Is it being applied to, is it answering the question, or is it achieving our mission? So, at Discovery Logic, we have an integrated platform that we use. So Thomson Reuters has Web of Science, Web of Knowledge. Some of you probably use EndNote. We have all these tools. We have insights. We have all these bibliometric tools. And then Discovery Logic, we've built an integrated platform called ScienceWire. And basically, it's a way of taking all these providers of research indicators, such as Web of Science, Medline for publications, federal grants catalog, US patents data, and then we're building a people database and having it in one place so that we can do all these analyses. It's pretty awesome. But, this allows us to do our evaluations where we can do these portfolio evaluations, we can do expert locator, and then we can do benchmarks of people, projects, and organizations. So, it really is kind of encyclopedia science. And just to give you an idea of some of the performance metrics that we're able to get out of ScienceWire, we can look at productivity. Well, you have the unit analysis, the indicator, and the data sources. And this just gives you an idea of the data sources that are available in Web of Science and how we apply them. So if we want to look at productivity, impact on a participant, impact on science, the immediacy of the impact, co-authorship, collaboration, network structure, and innovation. And we have all of these things right at our fingertips, and this is where it becomes important to really know the question that you want to answer in your evaluation, because when you have all this information, you can be like, I can do this, and I always see the junior analysts, they come in and they give you every graph possible, and then we sit there and say, what does it mean? Does it really add something? And so that's the big thing, is you have all this information available to you, but how do you use it? And so the next few slides, I'm just going to show you some images from some of the reports we've produced and how we've combined information from Web of Science into something that's usable. So this slide shows program outcomes evaluation. So this is an NIH slide, and they just wanted to see what are the characteristics of our applicants and awardees for an award program, and what is the impact of participation in the program. And so some of the stuff that we can do, we can analyze your application pool, or your applicant pool, and we can look at applicants in terms of awardees and non-awardees, and we have available to us, you know, race, ethnicity, gender, their degree, year since their degree, the prior support, and for this program, it's a loan repayment program, so it was their educational debt. You know, we found, strikingly enough, the more debt you have, the more likely you're going to go for this program. And then we can look at the program's impact. And the big thing for NIH is, are these people staying, or are they paying off their debt and then running away? You know, and so we can look at the retention in the research workforce. Are they becoming PIs on larger RO1s? Are they continuing to publish? Have their fields that they're publishing in, have they changed? You know, and the goal of the loan repayment program is to get them to do clinical research. So these are typically MD, PhDs. You know, did they run back to private practice, or did they say, hey, you know, this was fun? And then, you know, I have to keep myself from actually writing that in a report. You know, hey, this was fun, I'm going to stay. And then we can compare to similar programs, comparable programs. And the lower part of the graph, this is just something that we do that's really interesting to me, is those of you who've had an NIH grant know that there is that magic score, the magic score where I will be funded or I won't be funded, and you hate having that magic score because you don't quite know. And what we have done a job at is finding that window of that score where you have an equal possibility of being funded or not funded, and comparing those groups, because that's really telling you, those are the people you're most likely to lose if they don't get funded. And so we do a lot of our evaluations, we call it bubble analysis, looking at this group and focusing on this, because these are the people on the brink. You know, it's like, I either get this or I work at Target. So, and then, so, you know, that's just one of our general evaluations, and we can look at publications by subject category. We have all those capabilities through Web of Science, as every paper is tagged with the subject category. But then, because we have the other data in ScienceWire, we can look at R&D expenditures by discipline. So we can take those subject categories and look at the amount of dollars put there, and really you enrich your data. So it's not just like, okay, we have these subject categories and then I have this graph over here that shows what we spent. Now we can overlay. And these, I forgot to mention that the previous slide and the next couple are an evaluation for an academic institution that was looking at how they could spend a chunk of money so that they could meet their goals of meeting a certain group of institutions that they wanted to be like. So, and then we can have R&D expenditures by the source, you know, where does the funding come from? And then again, we can do R&D expenditures by discipline. So you get a little more information from it. You know, you can see, okay, well, we have these R&D expenditures, but now you know where the money's going, what field it's going to, and if you need to expand, if you want to expand your role in material science, and then you see the bar for material science is very tiny, then you know that's where you need to put a little more effort. And then you can also look at your grants by agency. So instead of just looking at, oh, we got X dollars of funding, you can really start to break down where your funding is coming from. And then, of course, since people are the biggest thing to come out of all this funding, you know, what does our workforce look like? You know, what's our intellectual capital, and who are we producing, and where are they going? So we can break down by faculty level, and then we can look at fields of PhD completions. So lots of fun stuff we can do with ScienceWire and evaluations. But we spend a lot of time, I'm showing you these very discrete slides where we have it all figured out, but to get there takes a lot of time and thinking about, is this really useful? Because we can produce a lot of graphs that, garbage in, garbage out. If you can produce a graph, but if it doesn't mean anything, then it's not a good effect on your evaluation. We can also do this for research centers, and this is a big area that NIH has approached us with now. There was a lot of funding towards collaborative or consortium type work, and so how do we look at these research programs and figure out if they're doing what they have said they were going to do? We can look at similar research areas, similar size, similar duration of the grant, and similar outcome window. So a lot of these grants have a set time, and then you have to achieve your goal by year X, Y, Z. And so then we can look at program impact. It makes science more 3D instead of, we put the money in and we got 10 papers out. You have a little more capability to say, well, we produced researchers in this. Publication counts may not have been that high, but it takes a while to put a paper together. But we produce these scientists, and now they're going on and they're continuing this research. And then if they're continuing clinical research, then that becomes products. Products help keep people healthy. You have to connect all of these dots when doing evaluation. So now we're really switching into the slides that are like really comfy slippers. So we do a lot of these program evaluations for NIH and academic institutions. But one of the things that we found as we were doing evaluations for academic institutions is every university has their own structure. I'll say structure, using structure very loosely. Their own way of managing their information. Large universities usually have multiple implementations of HR systems or faculty management systems. And we were thinking, well, it'd be really great if we collected all the information in the same way, and then we could use it so that you could kind of do this cross-university evaluation, and you're collecting the same information. Different people may be including different things in their profiles, but wouldn't that be great? Well, this is what happens. They stick us in a room and we come up with ideas and we actually make things. And so the questions that we had when we were thinking about an academic information management system is some of the common questions that you may have had managing departments or just groups of researchers. How do we search for researchers? This is the communications office saying, we had a paper come out in Science, but who's the right person to have talk to the papers? How can researchers search for each other? I mean, this is a big thing. If you're at a big campus, you may not know that Joe Smith is across the campus working on something that's similar or could help you. And this is actually, we always talk about research being siloed. This is a big barrier, and you could work a lot faster if you work together and share the glory. How can we streamline regular reporting tasks? Okay, so I was my thesis advisor's first grad student, and I remember getting his grants ready. Yeah, it was not a fun process, or if you're up for a promotion or tenure, it is not fun. And you have a lot of stuff to put together. I mean, just even maintaining your CV can be a full-time job. And so how do we streamline this and make it so that you're spending your time doing research or doing the things that actually give outputs that we can evaluate on the other side, instead of, gotta revise my CV again. What are the research strengths of my institution? So this is the administration perspective. It's like, okay, this is where we rank. What are my strengths? What do we want to highlight? And then where would we like to put more money, time, effort into recruiting people? It's a constant cycle. And then how do we compare to other institutions? So, again, this is student, faculty recruitment. If you want to get accredited among a certain group, how do we do this? So these were the questions that we asked ourselves. And it actually probably took longer to come up with the name for this product than it was to actually develop the data dictionary for the product, but we came up with Research in View, and this is our academic information system. And what we like about this, I was talking about ScienceWire, and we're talking about all the tools that we have available. It's a standard data model for collecting faculty, institution-wide faculty information. And it's a hosted solution, so it's a web interface, and it leverages all the resources that I showed you before. It's backed by ScienceWire, it's backed by Web of Science, and then so you can just search for your paper, add it, and all your citation counts and impact factors are right there. It's really cool. And it's right there, so you're not spending your time doing input. But then on the administrator side, you get data that all look the same. So you're looking at like versus like. It's not apples and oranges. It's not physics department and biology. You're collecting the same information and it's recorded the same way. And as I said, it integrates data across multiple sources. And the sources are provided by us as well as your HR system, your registrar, all of that stuff. We try to make it so that it's automated. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Thomson Reuters Researcher ID, but this is a free product where you can build your profile. It's great for deduplicating if you have a common name. And you can track your publications. You can link it to your EndNote web account. You can kind of gauge yourself. You can do your H factor and get all your average impact. But it integrates with this, so if you already have an EndNote library through Researcher ID, you can have your profile already populated. And so, we have these faculty tools, and we make it like a CV. We have a recommendation engine, so if you're really bad about keeping up with your profile, what it'll do is it'll troll ScienceWire and say, oh, this publication might be yours. Do you want to add it? And it's really, I get to play with it every day, and I still have fun. I pretend I'm everyone on my thesis committee, and I build their profile. And I'll build your profiles, just send me an email, I'll build your profile. But we have these regular alerts for journal articles, conference papers and proceedings, patents, and federal research grants. So you don't even have to remember it. It's not like you have to track down when I submitted the grant. We have all that information because we have all the public NIH funding information. We can just suck it right into your profile, and it's pre-populated, and then your administrators are happy because it's all there. And when they have to do reports for their bosses or to the state or to the federal government, what they've been doing, then the reports actually make sense. And so the top part, I don't understand the oozy animation on the slide. The top part is the interactive CV, and then these are the types of reports that you can have. Right now it's just simple activity counts, but really it helps streamline your work. And everybody's always like, what have you been up to the past 2 years? I made this slide. This is the data dictionary for research in VU, and basically I'm just showing you so you get an idea of the information that we collect. It's the biographical information, your teaching information, all your published works. Creative works, again, this is a university system, so even though you're a medical campus, we're looking at broader campuses with arts departments, collector service. I mean, this is a big thing, and I'm sure it's a big thing here as well, is how do you get credit for all the service that you do, all the public outreach that you do? And we don't really have bibliometrics for that, but this is a way for it to be recorded and for you to get credit for it and track it. We have civil engagement and partnerships, so if you're interacting with industry, that's been a big thing in evaluating proposals. It's how do you interact with industry, because that is going to be the person who manufactures something. If you're doing something with a clinical output, you have to have those resources available to you. So those sorts of partnerships, or even just public training courses, public awareness courses, your funding, and then facilities and instrumentation. We've been working with a lot of groups that have NIH CTSA grants, and they're supposed to track their facilities and instrumentation, but literally it's a line that says, list facilities, list instrumentation. So we're trying to put some framework around it, because then you can track things. Some of the public labs, I have a friend at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, they need to tag a beamline, a paper to a beamline, so that they can show that shared resource had this output. So that's what we're trying to collect there. So it looks very simple on a slide. There's a lot of information underneath here, but that's the type of tool that we like to build, because then we can say, all right, you already have the standard data model, and now we can do basic evaluations. And if you're ever interested in a demo, just shoot me an email. So in conclusion, so at the beginning we talked about the current research and socioeconomic climate contributing to a need for research assessment. I don't think that's ever going to change. The research climate is going to continue changing. It's going to become more and more collaborative because the funding is becoming more and more scarce. And so, you can't run away from research evaluation. It's going to happen, and it's better if you are aware of it and have a voice in how you're being evaluated rather than having people put indicators up for you to be evaluated against that are just not good measures of your work. And leading to that, there are many indicators that can serve as proxies for research impact. And again, you got to make sure you're using the right indicators for what you want to measure. And finally, there are many data sources and tools, not just Thomson Reuters products. Please don't feel like I'm trying to. But there are a lot of data sources and tools out there to help you evaluate research. And I mean, there are people that this is what we do for a living, is we do research evaluation, and we're here to help. We're here to provide guidance, because it's a lot of indicators. I mean, when I go into some of our products, I need the training course too, and I work for the company. So, you have to understand what the indicators are looking for and determine the questions for the evaluation and whether the data sufficiently address these questions. And I mean, really, if I don't stress one thing enough, it's you really have to sit back and define that research evaluation and make sure that you're going to have a successful evaluation. Understand what your program was looking for, what were the expected outcomes, and how are we going to measure them. So I just wanted to acknowledge the Franken presentation. The contributors were Jonathan Adams, the Director of Research Evaluation at Evidence, whose group does the Global Research Reports. My boss, who is Lori Hack, she's the Chief Science Officer of Discovery Logic, and Joshua Schnell, who is the Director of Analytics at Discovery Logic, and some resources. The Global Research Reports are available at this web link, and Research and View and other analytics tools, you can check them out on this website. So. Thank you for your attention and laughing at my jokes. And I look forward to the panel discussion.
This afternoon, to kind of wrap everything up, unless you're staying for Debbie Berlinstein's class, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we are going to finish up with a panel this afternoon of some of our research deans from here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. First of all, the first person to speak will be Dr. Kurt Sibben, who is the Associate Dean for Research, the Director of Center for Stem Cell Biology and Regenerative Medicine, and Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Followed by Dr. Donna Harrington, who is Professor and PhD Program Director at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. And finally, Dr. Barbara Smith, Associate Dean for Research and Professor of Family and Community Health at the University of Maryland School of Nursing. And just because I had a question about it, so I thought it was important for me to mention, we are taping this today. And the presentation will be available on our website tomorrow, and we are going to probably, if you come to the HCHSL website, have it clickable or accessible through a banner that will be on the top of the page. So if you want to see it again, and it'll be there, jokes and all. That's jokes. And of course, Yvette, Dr. Seeger is joining us on the panel as well, so it'll be an opportunity for you. We've asked each of the panelists to kind of give us just a couple sentences regarding some of their challenges or what they heard this morning. So we'll start with Dr. Sibben and move down the path. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be real quick, and given that we're being taped, I'll try not to be inflammatory, but to be stimulating. And so why am I here? And I guess I'm here because as I transitioned to a new job as a research dean, I was struck by how much money talks and how much the evaluation of where the school is going, how well my school is doing, where it ranks with other schools, had to do with how many grants X school, X department, X person had, how many grant dollars, what kinds of grants. But mostly it was money driven. And then as I got into other discussions where investments were requested, the decisions were then again based on money. And I was quickly saying, well, I was taught a long time ago, as you all have probably heard me say, because I love to say this, that grants are really rewards, not awards. And if I take the list of grants which I've applied for, which I've gotten, when I realized that in my writing and communicated that I'm asking this as a reward for what I've just done here and published, I get those grants. And every time I forget that, I don't get the grant because I'm talking about the potential. So in that, so if that is true, then I playfully respond to that in the way of being stimulated that, okay, but you're looking back at impact. And that's fine. A professorial promotion committee or something might want to look back only, but even there, the dean would say, but is this all the person's ever going to do? What's the potential looking forward, and where should we invest, in whom shall we invest, in what areas shall we invest? And so I come back to impact, and if impact isn't money, well, maybe papers is an impact because that's what's going to generate the money, but what do we want that impact to really be? And so I guess the notion again comes to that old saw of how has this person, this program, this department, this school moved the field? So what do I mean by that? Well, change thinking. Carol Greider was here yesterday. The discovery of the solution to the end of chromosome replication problem posed by Jim Watson years ago was telomerase. And that discovery, which she made in 5 papers, they made in 3 people, made in 5 papers, which were the first 5 papers of her CV, and the highest point of Carol's dazzling CV is these first 5 papers that changed thinking in a huge way. Changed practice, or that's the medical word, but what it means in your field. And so how did something change medical practice? A new drug, a new management scheme, new preventive, etc. And then finally, you can change practice, you can change thinking, but did it have an outcome on the street? How has this contributed to products, jobs, companies, the economy, health in general? If we had a way of measuring those things, then I'd buy. If I stop. I'm done.
This is always the fun part. Is that loud enough?
Mm-hmm.
Great. I actually really enjoyed the talk, and it gave me a lot to think about, because going through our APT process and sharing our APT reviews, we talk a lot about impact. And we use a number of the Thomson Reuters tools to look at those. But some of what's scary is you use the phrase days to first citation. We could have an article sit in the press for 12 months from the time it's accepted. So that means the next person to want to cite that article, their article could sit in press for 12 months. And that's after they got it submitted and accepted. So the like-to-like piece really appealed to me, that when we try to compare across disciplines, we need to know what the standards are in each, and even, as you said, within each discipline, within each subfield, and how fast those journals respond, and we can get things out. I also, much like her, think we need to look a lot at other ways to measure impact, because the faculty can very easily tell us, here's my H factor, here's my citation count, here's how many articles I've got that are being cited, here's the ones that, maybe I shouldn't have done that one, because it didn't get cited, which might actually be better than negatively cited. So you've got to figure that one out. So, kind of looking at that, but also what's the real impact of it? So, did I write a paper that described a program evaluation and now that program's being implemented in 15 locations? They happen to be small, not-for-profit agencies, so they're not publishing the fact that they're implementing it. But how do we get a grasp on that? How do we measure it? How do we include it? So those were my couple sentences.
Hi, Barb Smith from the School of Nursing. Nursing has arrived at research relatively a short time ago compared to medicine and some of the other basic science disciplines. We've primarily been an education and practice discipline and really didn't pay a lot of attention to research until about 25, 30 years ago when we started stomping for the National Institute for Nursing Research. It's still the smallest institute on the campus and has a very small budget, but we're making inroads into a number of the other institutes. One of the things that struck me when you talked about the number of citations was, can you imagine being the person, the UK pediatrician who first published his work on the connection between vaccines and autism. So we always have those little glitches in the number of citations and that kind of thing. But you know, nursing right now, I would say that most of the leaders in nursing didn't really, or haven't really even today, recognized the importance of senior author, and that we're trying to change those kind of ways of thinking and explain why senior author is extraordinarily important. And you know, some of the other things. So we're doing a lot of catching up in nursing, but we've kind of climbed the ladder slowly and surely. This past year, we were ranked 21st among schools of nursing. Again, it's so important. I mean, if we stack ourselves up against the School of Medicine, you know, we're dwarfed by the size of our income stream. But I can tell you that this past year when we celebrated the ERA funding, we were second behind the School of, a very distant second behind the School of Medicine in the receipt of ERA funds. But we got a decent chunk from the government. So we're making inroads. We're still very young and very naive, but beginning to look at some of the things we can do to evaluate our discipline. Impact factors in many of the nursing journals are pretty low, so we're trying to work on getting those up and more recognized. A lot of the faculty are trying to publish in other disciplines journal where the impact factor is higher, so that when they come up for promotion and tenure, those kinds of things can be weighed. That's my 2 cents.
Let's open this up to questions. Does anybody have any questions for any of our panelists? Starting with anybody that spoke today. Yes.
So thank you very much. It was a very insightful presentation. I want to pick up in part on what Kurt talked about and sort of reinforce that. I was mindful years ago, I chaired a promotion committee for the Jans, who were famous for developing the shaker gene, amongst other things. They were going for promotion to full professor, and they had only 16 publications between them. And it was the worst battle I've ever faced, and to get them promoted. How can you promote somebody with 16 papers? Well, each one opened a new field. And being mindful that Kurt has talked about, I think we tend to be over-focused on research dollars. First off, much less on the quality of an impact of the papers in terms of changing thinking and changing fields. And so I'm wondering, there's so many moving targets. The H index, of course, it's the H index, whether you use yours or Google Scholar. Elsevier, when I was editor-in-chief of the journal for them, used to do a a mock-up using their universe, which was very different than ISI's actually. How much self-citation you look at is a big issue as you talk about reviews, which get large numbers of citations very often versus point articles. Have you thought about, with your contacts and discussions, coming up with another metric that really attempts to normalize it in much different ways? As you say, compare like with like. Is there a way to sort of match a profile of investigator X? He's in field Y, he works in this area, he publishes in this area, that combines both publication rate, quality of the impact, maybe research funding from the most competitive institutes, NIH, NSF, and so on. Have you come up with that as a way to have a better sort of quantifier for judging performance for people to get money?
Well, this is why I'm still employed. We definitely talk about it. I mean, basically everyone in our staff is their former scientists. Every once in a while we joke that we're failed scientists, but we understand that there is this issue, and right now we have what's measurable. But what we also try to take into consideration is even with all the custom evaluations that we do, we put forward those intangibles, because those are the things, as I said earlier to Dr. Sibin, it's that sparkle that they have, and there's no way right now to measure that sparkle, but that's the kind of information that we're trying to get at, and we're certainly not the only company that's trying to figure out how to do this, but it is, how do we have the measure of impact? I mean, we have impact factor, but then there are the issues with impact factor. I heard it from you. You have people publishing in different journals because they're concerned about that measure. If they think they're going to be measured against that, they're going to go after that target. So yeah, so we still have work to do. So we're definitely thinking about it and looking at ways to overlay it, but we don't have the magic bullet right now. But that's one of the biggest drivers of all the different categories that we collect in research and review, and another product that we've done for NIH, which is the electronic scientific portfolio analysis tool. It's trying to combine all these things, and then you have to figure out how you slice it and dice it and what's going to be important to you, because there are those intangibles. I mean, I've got plenty of them on my CV, so.
The one thing that I was thinking about too was how do you capture kind of some of the very rare but important prizes that are awarded to a university? I was before I came to Maryland, I was at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and I remember when the first Rhodes Scholarship was awarded to a young engineer at the Huntsville school or university branch of Alabama, and how that was such a big deal. Or some schools, if they're fortunate enough to have Nobel laureates, and that. So how do you bring those prizes into the equation?
Well, and there is that cachet of having that, and it's something that we collect, and actually one of the evaluations that I'm working on right now that's a custom, it's looking at, are they getting special prizes, are they serving on, like I used to staff a federal advisory committee, are they being invited, because that is prestige. And again, no measure for prestige, unfortunately, but you have to know it's there, and my job as the evaluator is to say, this is something that's really prestigious, and within your field, like we look to you, the expert, to say, this is prestigious in my field, this is something that it's worth counting, and you just have to push for that indicator. It doesn't have a number attached to it, but you have to say, this is something that I consider the best of the best in my field, and it may not equal those publications. It's one of those things that I definitely understand the importance in Pew Scholars, or in the DC area, we're going to say, have you been picked on certain different, and we even categorize, a review panel versus reporting to the HHS secretary, because it's different level of some are high profiles, others are, you get boxes of grants. So, how do we gauge those?
I have a question back here.
discussion of today, the status today, what we think about today. When you reach my age, and I'm probably the oldest faculty member on this campus, when you reach my age, you sort of ponder what's happening today and what happened yesteryear and what went on in previous generations of research. Think of this. Look at the NIH edict for support of research grants. To fund the best science by the best scientists, not to fund the best researchers, by the best researchers. There's a distinction between a researcher and a scientist. And that distinction has been lost in the contemporary generation. The reason I make this statement now is because I looked around while the presentation was going on, and I saw the attentiveness of all the young people. I'm not speaking to the old guys. And if you think that you are being trained as a scientist, the chances are most likely you are not. You are being trained or have been trained as a super technologist and perhaps in addition a researcher. So what we have to get around to is before my passing, which will be the end of the generation that has the philosophy that's existed in the past. Before that ends, you are the next generation that can save us. That can save us from our shortfalls in what we are supposed to be doing in medicine, in nursing. By the way, I used to run the department that presented the physiology course for the School of Nursing. And hopefully you demand that you are trained and your next generation will be trained as scientists, not as researchers. Now, if you don't know the distinction between the two, I don't want to take up the time to do that. Go to PubMed, look up my name, in academic medicine publications, and you'll find two that describe precisely what we are talking about. And the older generation folks understand this, and the younger generation folks do not. That's where we have to bring this country, and even internationally, back into the quality of science and the quality of scientists as being our aim and purpose.
What is your name? What is your name?
Costello. You don't know me? I'm infamous around here.
Yes.
I hope you get those citations for fame, not notoriety.
I thought it was very interesting, and I appreciate your talk. I serve on a lot of peer review committees. I have many years on faculty affairs and graduate council and do peer reviews. I also work, I guess I should disclose, I work 25% time for NCI, so I'm also on that side of things, so I see a lot of this. And I guess one of my issues, and you dealt with it a little bit, is the schizophrenic nature of what we're doing and our mission. So here's a public institution. We are training a lot of health professionals. That's a major goal, and we do, I think, a phenomenal job here. We have clinical responsibilities, people with a lot, and we hire people because they're excellent in these two areas. And then we have I think, amazing research program given the constraints of it. But we hire people in these different areas, and then we judge them all on the same metrics. And so one of my issues is how, it's nice to count metrics, but how do we level the playing field so that we actually can judge people on the jobs that we hire them or expect them to do, is one, in a fair way, across the different types of jobs people will have in an academic research institution like this. And the other one is even kind of more is, you know, all your metrics, one of the things I see missing, and I see this all the time, is you don't count second rank. So when you look at all these, it's like, well, you might be getting grants, small grants, but who are you competing with? So in other words, is it better to lose 6 grants to Harvard than to have gotten 2 small grants in an institution that no one's competing? So even just, it's not just the money, but it's the kind of what sphere you're working in and how competitive it is. It's, I think, quite an important metric that is not a metric.
Well, and that's something that we do, and yeah, it was missing from the slides. We do try to add environment, and some of the customs that we do, it's, you know, what was the environment at the beginning? We're looking at NCI's K Award program, you know. What was the environment during the doubling period, and what is it now? I mean, you have to say it's drastically different, and we do try to factor in that environment as well. But you're exactly right. We can't we would love to stick numbers on everything, but that's where you really have to, that question of what is the program trying to evaluate, and what do you want to get out of it? That's when you factor in those less measurable attributes, because we know they're there and they're important.
I'd like to ask Dr. Costello, way back when I was doing my philosophy of science course, and that the one factor that just blew me away was the fact that almost all the really important discoveries over the last several centuries have been made by newcomers to the field. Not the old timers, not the people that had been slaving in the trenches, but newcomers to the field because they were thinking a little differently. And how do you identify those scientists early in their careers and support them? Because a lot of things was, oh, you know, they're just an assistant professor, or, you know, they only have 16 publications, and that kind of thing. So, you know, early in my career, I worked for Fred Robbins at the Institute of Medicine. And one day I was sitting at lunch with him, and I said, you know, you won the Nobel Prize at the age of 27. What do you do for an encore? You know, and here's this guy who has probably probably at that time as many gray hairs as you do, and as I probably do. But you know, at 27 he won the Nobel Prize, and it's those young scientists that are struggling in the trenches that sometimes don't get recognized, or they get kind of pushed down. That you know, how do you pick those out? How do you use some of these metrics maybe to evaluate them?
Well, and we have done some of those evaluations for grant programs that are specifically targeting things that aren't funded by NIH. And, you know, that's where having a cross-platform, you know, it's like we can compare the applications and the people who are applying and say, is this person that's new, or is this somebody who's trying to do something new? And I mean, again, it was, I think, one of my former employers, we're always asked if we have an innovation impact, or an innovation factor. And we don't, unfortunately, but when we have a great idea for it, I think a lot of people are looking for it, because you're exactly right. I mean, most of these big discoveries are made by graduate students, early career. They have everything to gain, you know, and very little to lose. You know, it's like they can take that risk, and you know, we don't have metrics for it, and that's where you will never be able to just evaluate, or at least in my opinion, only. You know, you can't just evaluate people based on the numbers. You kind of have to look at the whole package, and it's that research black box. You know what it is, but sometimes you just can't put a number to it, and we never want to lose sight of that. I mean, we can take all these factors, and all these indicators, but there is that personal touch and feel as well that you need to add to it.
I have a question. How do you decide what journals or publication types to include in your citation reports? Because obviously when you run a report, you only get the citations of of those journals or vehicles that you track. And I'm especially talking about the new electronic media. I mean, I know obviously some of those journals you do pick up, but there may be other types of electronic publishing that are not being measured for impacts through your service or other services.
Well, and we are, with ScienceWire, we are limited to Web of Science, which has precise rules for being included in Web of Science journals. But yes, this is another thing that we have to factor, is a changing field of publishing, you know, the electronic journals, and this varies field to field, and this is a very field-specific thing, whereas like in engineering, they tend to publish conference papers and proceedings. You have to look at the environment, just all those, that slide with all the inputs, outputs, and all the little boxes. We have to look at the whole picture and decide, and we work with the client and say what's the best picture of your field, and you know, make sure that we're comparing like to like as much as possible. It's not the definitive answer you were hoping for, but.
Well, I was just gonna say, I can remember 6 years ago, I went with a group, I was the president of the Medical Library Association at the time, and I went with a group of nursing researchers from the Inane group, which is an unfortunate name for that group of individuals, but they're called Inane. And we took the train up to ISI at the time, Thomson Reuters was just entering the picture in Philadelphia, to ask them to include more research, nursing research journals in the Web of Science piece. And so, you know, if there are journals that aren't being added, you know, certainly there's a, as you say, there's a methodology for their inclusion, but I you know, based on a lot of things I'm hearing, there's a lot of things that you can't capture in the ISI Web of Science. I mean, if you hear people like Adam Bly speak from SEED, he talks about a lot of the information that's being shared and discovered that's appearing only in, not even in electronic journals, but on the web, in blogs, and where important things are happening in an area that we're not even capturing in any way, shape, or form. So,
Well, and that's one of the things, I mean, that's actually one of the publication types of research and review, because we do know that, you know, we're factoring in, apparently lawyers love to do online publishing. Imagine that. So, you know, and looking at these different modes of communication, because it is communication, and communication is getting your idea out there. But, you know, we are kind of shackled for some of our analyses and some of the numbers to what we've classified in Web of Science, and you know, we have to move with it. So, you know, it's a good thing for us to think about. You know, how are we going to provide a metric to it, or do we? You know, how do we score these things? Is there a score? Is there a way to measure?
I was just going to add that although I'm very attached to Web of Science, there are other things you can use, and if you stay for the class, one of them is called Publisher Parish, which is an open website that bases citation analysis on Google Scholar. And it's just another, not better, not worse, but another way to look at some numbers, and it pulls in some more of those, you know, it's less authoritative than Web of Science or Scoping, but it pulls in some things that are a little bit mushier from the web. So it might be something to look at. If you just Google Publisher Parish.
No, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really wonderful to see, you know, the science behind the tools. You know, I mean, I do use Web of Science on a regular basis, and to know how this thinking goes beyond the picture. I had a couple of questions. The first one, you know, you've existed for a long time, right? Thomson Reuters, and these tools, and you mentioned that you can predict, based on all this data, some future trends. You know, what's the next hot things? Have you been able, in your experience with that, to actually correctly predict area of interest?
Well, you know, they do try to do the thing that is the funniest thing that I guess Thomson does, and I don't specifically work in that area, so I don't want to go too far beyond it. But every year they try to predict the Nobel laureates, and they've actually had some pretty good success looking at and using, and I don't recall all the specific metrics, but that's the thing that gets a lot of press. You know, it's usually the week leading up to the announcements, and then, you know, were we right? And this year we were pretty good, you know. But then I remember sitting, you know, at meetings at Cold Spring Harbor, and, you know, with usually a glass of wine, and making predictions ourselves, and we were pretty good too. So you know, you can put the metrics to it, or you can do the personal evaluation, and you kind of know what was game changing. And but I haven't done that work specifically, no.
And the second question was, had you, in your analysis, ever included a parameter that's looked at where these scientists originated? Was it in a small liberal college or no small? Because that would be, you know, an interesting point in where the emphasis of generating this, you know, new generation of scientists. Yes, you know, we hear about their research when they're at Harvard, but where were they nurtured when they were young scientists? And I think a lot about this because I am going into academics, and I have to make the right choice to have, you know, that interaction and that mentorship that's so essential.
And
there is no factor for mentorship. I don't know how you
we have looked at that. A lot of times we are looking more at where people are getting their terminal degree, so their medical degree, what type of, or their PhD, using the Department of Education, iPads, or the Carnegie classifications, and the type of atmosphere that they're coming from. We've done some work looking at undergraduate, but yeah, it's, you know, I come from a teeny tiny liberal arts college where you're able to sit and think and be creative. You know, does that give me a leg up, or should I have been in a research one institution right off the bat to have success? I think that's a great point, and we are looking at some of those in some of our evaluations.
So, question for you, Kurt, since you represent the School of Medicine here, and I'm going to pick up on a point that Dr. Faden made before. No one disputes how useful these metrics are, and I thought you did a great presentation of that. No one disputes that, but I guess here's my question for you. Is there an over-reliance on metrics at this point? And let me give you just the downside to this. I know a lot of people here, for those whom I don't know, our office works with junior faculty in a variety of capacities. And with this extraordinary reliance on metrics, which I think all of us agree is what's happening right now, and it's happening at a time when, as we all know, funding has become much more difficult. And I feel like the metrics hasn't kept pace with the reality of what we know is going on at the NIH. So my question to you is, our experience, one of the probably most surprising and most dispiriting aspects of my own work here is that over the last 6 months, the number of ethics cases that have come into my office is huge. And I don't deal with ethics, you need to understand, that's not my job. But I do deal with junior faculty, and because we're the front line for junior faculty, that is where the cases come first in School of Medicine. The number of ethics issues has risen exponentially. Do you think that there is any type of relationship between this unbelievable emphasis on metrics, which have not changed to take account for the changing funding climate, and this extraordinary increase in ethical problems? Kurt.
So Wendy's kindly setting me up here for
Pretty
our
much,
slam,
Kurt.
because where I'm going to come and where she sits on this issue. That wonderful quote from, was it Goodhart, that if there's a system, you know, it's going to be manipulated. We had a bioengineer come to talk, and he was in his 40s, and he had 500 papers, you know, and we kind of laughed at everything. And then later on in his visit, we were talking about rankings, and we were mentioning this ISI ranking, where the university system in Maryland came out 11th on the list, if I counted right. And we were saying, hey, that's good. But we immediately all looked at it and said, well, where do our schools come out? You know, where does this? And he said, yeah, in his department of engineering at Rice, in their School of Engineering, every department on their website had some category in which they were number one. So, you know, you can play these games a lot, and I guess another story is this issue came up in a recent discussion where Harold Varmus was leading the discussion, and poor Harold, nobody ever cites him or the oncogene anymore, nor does anybody cite anybody else. So, you know, it's part of the wallpaper. And how do you value that and everything? But he was saying, you know, everybody gives me all these metrics and numbers, and I always come back to them, and I ask them, where's the spark question of what did this person do, and what did it mean, and what was the impact on it. I want to switch though to a different area, because you know we could spend all our lives, and we do, evaluating each other and worrying about promotions and grants and stuff like that. But there's a very big picture that maybe Yvette could tell us a little bit, called StarMetrics, and the issue of how the NIH is proposing, or is thinking of proposing, or is moving to propose, to justify its budget. And that is nowhere more clear than in the past week and weekend and everything. And the fact that the NIH budget is going to stay almost the same this year, we're really happy, but we wonder what happens next month, next year, and everything. And you know, what do we do for the public? We write a piece with stimulating words in it. We give a couple of examples, and we give some stats. We find some stats that are good for us. I mean, that's what we do as a medical science body to try to justify the NIH budget or other science budgets, not just NIH. And so the search is on, because now it's not just the Republicans, but a liberal Democratic president who's calling for metrics. And they all want numbers. How are we going to get numbers? And there are these proposals out of StarMetrics that are developing. I wonder if you can educate us a little on this.
Oh man, you put me on the spot. No, we are working with NIH on StarMetrics. It's not my area of expertise, so. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, there is this push from the administration to use metrics, and NIH, because we've developed the ESPA, the Electronic Scientific Portfolio Assistant for them, they're trying to use that information that we've helped slice and dice, and how do we make this a reasonable metric? And that's about the extent that I can, but we're definitely working with them on making sure it's a reasonable assessment of science, because we don't want it to be reactionary, and we certainly don't, you know, it's an interesting perspective, you know, chasing impact, you know, chasing those things just to make yourself look better, and then you get all these ethics cases against you, and then you become radioactive, you know, what have you done to your career, so.
Or should an institution do it? And I meant to come back and hit that point. It's tragic when an individual does it, but what about when an institution does it? Or what about when we as a community of science oversell, you know, I work on stem cells, oversell stem cells. You know, there are going to be consequences to things like that, but we have to sell. And where's the line? And what's a reasonable metric? And how manipulated can they be? There are scientific principles that we can use on some of this, and some of the questions you ask, there's always the question of, okay, that line, what does it mean?
Well, and that's why it's so important. I mean, you know, when I decided to leave the bench, everyone's like, oh, you just threw everything in the toilet, you know, and really you need scientists doing these evaluations, because we understand that black box, and, you know, no, I don't do this. My wrist is very happy that I don't pipette anymore, but, you know, it's one of those things that you need to make sure that the staff is, you're essentially the peers. I mean, we have to keep up as much on the science and be able to say, no, there isn't a metric for this, but this is what we know, this is the field, you know, that's, I think, one of the things that we're always trying to stress, even when we do evaluations. You know, a lot of times they look at, well, have we produced these people that are going after R01s? Well, there are other things that you can do with your science background too, and that they're no less worthy than getting that R01 and being a bench researcher, because we've produced a ton of PhDs, and there aren't enough academic positions for them. So, you know, we always are trying to do that intangible and balance it. But yeah, there is a push from the government for metrics.
And if we can link from grants and papers to some sort of outcomes, that's going to be really important. And
Exactly.
if those are good links, if those are really predictive links that we
Yep.
can test with hypotheses.
Yep.
May I add this is
Yes, please.
comment? I'm glad you raised that issue. Because it's fundamental to what I refer to as being trained as a scientist. Everybody in this room should be required to read some of the old studies and old philosophies. And one of them is very simple. One of them is dedication to science means the following. You conduct an experiment. You have an idea. You conduct an experiment. You conduct the experiment according to the scientific method, properly. And then the word comes out. Nature has spoken, the result of the experiment. And once nature has spoken, personal biases must disappear. Now, when you have that kind of understanding of science and the responsibility of the scientist, most of these issues of bioethics disappear from the scene. But you see, we haven't trained recent generations of researchers to think along the lines of not only how you conduct science, but what the responsibilities of the scientist is once the conduct of the experiment is over with. You have to read Claude Bernard. Claude Bernard is the father of modern physiology and the father of modern medicine. He set the stage for medicine, meaning of health sciences, for medicine becoming a scientific endeavor rather than an empirical endeavor.
I guess kind of thinking, at least from social work and perhaps some of the other fields, the metrics are wonderful. We use them, they're part of the picture, but not everything is going to be eligible for NIH or NSF funding. And so if we continue to put too much emphasis on the amount of grant money that comes out of something or comes into something, we're going to shortchange some really good intervention research that gets funded through foundations or that doesn't cost a lot of money to do so that we can actually fund it in-house. And so I think that's an important part of the equation, is that we don't just look at a particular funding stream as being the only one that's appropriate. And the comment about ethics, I think, coming from a doctoral program perspective, we put a lot of energy into training our new scientists, and we hope that when we graduate them, they go into nurturing environments. By the same token, when we hire junior faculty, we've made a big investment in hiring them, and I hope we're providing them with an environment that doesn't put so much emphasis on getting an R01 or publishing in the premier journal that we basically suffocate them before they make it through their third-year contract renewal.
One of the metrics that I found really interesting, I worked on this evaluation with the Center for Excellence in Research and Therapeutic Research program, and we did something called network analysis, and what it showed was really an impact in your field, because it showed it was like a spider web and multiple, so for example, one program had huge impact and was collaborating with many groups, and so their webs were like starbursts all over. And then one other group which had great metrics, i.e. they were publishing that a whole lot per dollar, like almost extraordinary amount of publications, kind of off the charts. They had almost circular, just a very small, and so you could see that yes, maybe in one area that you're counting, they looked really good. But when you actually looked at the impact of the field and how their work was being translated and applied, it was very small.
And those
I
are
thought
actually
that
some of
was
the slides I
really-
left off. I mean, the network analysis is really, really cool, and you can see the shift too as you have certain grants or certain programs and the shift of who they collaborate with, and they're pretty awesome. And that's exactly what we see a lot of the time is the best metrics. They're very isolated because they've focused on publishing that way, but if they're more collaborative, sometimes they have to reach out to journals that may not have the most
fantastic impact factor.
Or they go international. And so you see a splash here, but then you see a trickle down that keeps going. And I think that's a really nice way to augment what we're doing, is to look at that also.
I wonder if, in the spirit of what Les was suggesting, and I take that as really think about this, in one way, the ISI Thomson Reuters has done an omic experiment, unbiased, just collect everything, maybe not everything, but take all the bias points out, take all the impact factors off, collect it all, make some sort of hypothesis for what you want. I mean, if you want you're looking for an engineer and you're trying to use your tools for which engineer to hire, put some bias points on them, write down what those bias points are, let X equal this, let Y equal this, see who you come out with, get a different committee to pick up a different bunch of bias factors, see what you come out with, maybe compare that to who is hired based on a totally subjective sort of system, and do some experiments with these metrics. I'd like to say before we use them, but maybe it's going to be as we use them. It would be fun to do that and to test uses of tools rather than try uses of tools as we go.
Any other comments, questions, anything from the panel?
Question.
Yes, please.
Someone tried to develop, something I've never seen, a tool that measures mentoring in any fashion. The output of students one's trained, or faculty one's trained, and what their impact has been on the field this time. I know folks who we have never had established reputations as high as you might like, who have trained and influenced an enormous number of individuals who have been influenced.
No, and that's actually, I love it. You set me up to talk about my favorite thing, research and review. We do collect it, and we do have for each, and it's based on Ohio State's Pro collection system, so we're partners in developing it. But they have put a lot of emphasis on the mentoring, and so there is a lot of information that we collect, and we do collect certain items of, noteworthy accomplishments. Now, it's hard to make something that we hope would be an international product and make all the selections possible, but, there are other things. Did they present at a national or international conference, or, have they gotten a faculty position? So we do collect those sort of items, but again, it's either you have it or you don't. As mode of collection, there's no numbers or actual hardcore metrics to it. But it is something that's very important to collect, and that was actually the fun part of working on a data model. It's like all the stuff that goes into that university experience, how does that impact how you are when you get out, when you get that degree, and what you decide to do. And so we try to make sure that we collect all of those things, because, yeah, we have a few things that we can measure, but there's so much more to that university experience.
But, couldn't they use something like when you apply for a T32, you have to put in there, who you've mentored and what their current position is and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we parse that information out of federal grants as well. I mean, you get credit for the training grant, you get credit for the mentoring, and there's lots of ways to slice it and dice it and record the information.
As you're aware, this has been proposed as an additional criteria for priority scoring of grants, is the mentoring training that the grants are provided in addition to the discovery part.
Anybody else? Well, first of all, thank you to our very entertaining, engaging, and knowledgeable panel. So let's give them another round of applause.